So for the people who argue it didn't, like Dom Crossan, who I'm beating up on right now, but he can take it, he's a big guy. So click on through here forward for me, because I'm going to use just a couple of pictures to help make a couple of points. If you're going to say it probably didn't happen, you're going to have to deal with a couple of certain facts. And they're going to have their arguments, we're going to have ours. And I just want to give you a quick overview as to what they are. The first one is, did the crucifixion happen? Was Jesus of Nazareth, like thousands of others in his time and place, nailed to crosses as an instrument of societal terror by the Roman Empire? Well, no scholar argues with that. Everyone knows the Romans, in particular, Pontius Pilate, at different points crucified dozens, even hundreds of people, because this form of public cruel death was meant to say to everybody who watched that person writhe and breathe their last agonizing breaths out, whether over hours or, as is clearly recorded, and no one disputes, sometimes over days. The whole point was, if you had to walk back and forth past that on your way to the market for the day's groceries, if your kids had to walk back and forth past that on their way to school, what's that tell you? It says, don't mess with the Roman Empire. They did it. No one disputes it. So we know Jesus was crucified. Well then, if he was crucified, and the narratives we have in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John are accurate about that, well, historically speaking, an account which is accurate in some things should at least be taken seriously in the next things that it says. But then there are two other factors we've got to take into account. And one is, it's so obvious sometimes we miss it. Who moved the stone? Right? Who moved the stone? Because every account agrees, nobody really disputes, that when the women arrive on Easter morning, there at the tomb, the stone was rolled away. And really no one on any side of the debate argues that the stone was moved. So the question is, who moved it? We need to think about that. Who moved it has something to do with what happened. And after who moved the stone, there's the question, what happened to the body? A body is a very real thing. I know we have some folks who work in law enforcement here in the sanctuary, and I suspect there's a few of you who've watched CSI, and you may be aware of something, which is bodies are hard things to get rid of. And they're extremely hard to get rid of without leaving evidence. And that's really as true 2,000 years ago as it is today. Back then, maybe even more so. There weren't as many closets or basements or places where you could stash or hide or secret away a corpse. And people who get involved in murder or other nefarious doings find out, you can't just make a body vanish. They're stubborn things. What happened to the body? Now, there are different ways to answer that, other than the Christian one, but we have to look at what those answers are and say, does that make any sense? So we've got who moved the stone, what happened to the body, and then, well, what happened afterwards? And what do we make of that? But there is a fellow, and these three big, thick, heavy books are by a particular fellow who I'm drawing an awful lot of what I'm saying today out of. He stands in a consistent stream of Christian scholarship. But I just want to lift up his name because he is somebody who is out there working and lecturing and teaching and preaching contrary to what so many folks like Dom Crossan are saying. This is Tom Wright, N.T. Wright in the scholarly world. But Tom Wright is a bishop in the Church of England, but he's an amazing scholar. And among other things, he wrote this book, The Resurrection of the Son of God, where he goes through, is this a thick book? That's really all you need to know, right? He takes some time and he works his way through more than just the highlights that I'm hitting you with today. And he takes seriously every question. And just as Dom Crossan does, he takes seriously, hey, maybe something else happened. Maybe somebody else moved the stone than an angel. Maybe something else happened to the body other than Jesus rose and walked among us. But if so, who? And for what purposes? And what would that tell us? And how does that weigh against the evidence? So I just love Tom Wright as a brother in Christ. I've never met him. I hope to get to hear him speak in person someday. I am certain that I will see him in heaven. But I also have to lift up this one other picture of Tom Wright, which is only here because I want my wife to see it on the big screen. Is that not the most beautiful office you have ever seen? There is at least one corner of heaven that I firmly believe will look like Tom Wright's office. But anyhow, he's a scholarly guy, and he ducks no issues. Because it's really easy to duck the question, well, what about? What if? What many of us might have wondered about. Could it have been the Romans? Could it have been the Jewish authorities? Could it have been just wishful thinking on the part of the disciples, who later came together and went off in a new direction with just a hope, but not a certainty? So let's just go back and hit these nice and quick. The stone. Who moved the stone? Actually, it's a pretty short list. Think about it, folks. If there was a tomb, if Jesus was crucified, and if he was laid down and buried, nobody disputes this, then somebody moved the stone. Could it have been the women? And they told a story later that's what's recorded in the Gospels. Ladies, please don't be mad at me, but not very likely. It would have taken a large number of men with tools to be able to move those stones. They were designed that way for a purpose, to seal the tomb. They weighed tons, and it's rounded, but it's not that round. So it couldn't have just been one person. And any of you who have ever, I'm saying in your pre-Christian lives, been involved in lies and wrongdoing, I'm not pointing fingers, I'm just saying, you may know what happens when you have a lie and you involve more people in it. And what happens when you add... What, none of them went to high school? I don't believe that. The more people involved in a lie or covering up a lie, the faster the truth comes out. Trust me, I work for the juvenile court through the week, and that's what makes our lives easier, is the teenagers can't keep their mouths shut. And the moment you tell two people, they tell two people, they tell two people, do the math. Word gets back around really quick. And they said, but I didn't tell anybody. All you gotta do is tell two. Who moved the stone? Did the Romans move the stone? I'm sorry, I should do them last. Did the disciples move the stone? That's one theory put out there. Did the disciples swipe the body, hide it, and then announce, hey, we're starting a church, everybody come, our founder rose again? But they didn't believe it. That requires you to believe that all 11 of the first apostles in Acts chapter 2, plus all the people around them, knew a lie and kept it all the way to their deaths. Does that seem likely? Not so much. It is possible that the Jewish authorities moved the stone and took the body. Go ahead and click us to that next picture, just to remind us of the hard fact of that tomb and that body on that bench. Well, you know, no matter how you go at it, it's a real challenge to figure out how and why the Jewish authorities would have taken the body. They knew about the traditions of a Messiah who would rise again. Why would they help that story along? And the people who seem to have the most to do with wanting to see Jesus crucified and taking him to Pilate, they were the ones who were the most obsessed with cleanliness. Do you realize what handling a dead body does to your observance of Passover? It would be the same as saying, okay, hide the body for no good reason any of us can figure out to help your enemies, and then you don't get to have Thanksgiving dinner the next